and start. Hey guys, it's me. Welcome to your seat at the table. Got little mama, great white mama sitting over here beside me. She just had a bit of an episode. I thought she was having a seizure. She decided she had a bite on her backside and she twisted herself into a literal pretzel and peed herself. Scared the bejesus out of me. But my wife is convinced that it was nothing to worry about. So here we are doing another round of videos. It is the middle of November. We are fast coming up on the Thanksgiving holiday for those of us who do celebrate Thanksgiving and other holiday observances. It kind of amazes me, even though I know it shouldn't, every now and then I will run across people, usually customers, who don't celebrate some of the holidays we do because of their ethnic backgrounds or their religious beliefs, or just because sometimes, I don't know, or just kind of, it's a little off-putting and a bit of a shock. Even though I try to be an open-minded individual, it is very difficult to do, you know, it really does. So we talk about Battlespace, the Battletech game of space combat. This is something I think I only managed to get to play twice in my lifetime. And I had a friend who, you know, he's still alive, he's not dead, but, you know, and I'm friends from afar because I haven't talked to the man in over 30 years. I mean, I'm not even sure exactly where he lives, and part of me doesn't want to intrude if, you know, we had our partings, we were best friends growing up. He was the first person I met when my family moved in 1972. When my family moved to Mitchellville, the small town I grew up in, David was the very first person I ever met, and he and I were thicker than thieves for all through high school, or into the last 2 years of high school. Junior and senior high this was when things really started to diverge. I started dating my ex-wife to be, and he was dating various young ladies, including at one stage my sister, which was a terrible mistake. Anyway, he was into sports. I'm obviously not a sports guy. I was working a lot more hours than he was. He went into the military. And then after about 3 months or 4 months, something about he broke his leg or broke a foot or something in basic in the first couple of weeks of doing basic, and then they insisted that he take basic over again, and when he refused to do it, they let him go. You know, so he had the opportunity and let it go. I never got the opportunity because I was a little too fat and convinced had very low self-esteem. I convinced myself it was never going to happen. I spent a good chunk of my life convincing myself things would never happen, and guess what? They didn't happen because I made no efforts to try to correct the issues or to find ways to fix things. Anyhow, him and I have parted ways, and I haven't talked to him in, like I said, over 30 years. I used to send him a couple letters and Christmas cards, and I'd never get anything back. And after a couple years of that, you just get the message. They either don't care, or he's got a grudge, or there's something I'll never know that, you know, fell between us. Same thing happened to my other best friend, Richie. He was probably my biggest game friend when it came to running doing games. It was Richie's brother that had the original D&D stuff. It was through Richie that I got introduced to the hobby in 1974-ish and 75-ish, somewhere in there. And it was through access to his brother's stuff. I got the address for TSR, and then so on and so forth. You hear me ramble on about it off and on. Quite a bit, here and there, I guess. Anyhow, he did join the Air Force and successfully did so. Once again, the last 2 years of high school was very changing for all of us. He did not like my ex-to-be and probably was much wiser than I was when it came to that sort of thing, although he found his own future spouse, and I found her to be a terribly, terribly difficult person to be around, mostly because I felt he was much better than what she was treating him like in my mind, but what do I know? I was biased at the time. And anyway, he went on to the service and got himself a good education. He's got a real good job. I bumped into him, ironically, when I was in college in 2000-ish. when I was going to DMAC, the Des Moines Area Community College, to study for an Associate of Applied Sciences degree, and that's the term they got. It says it right on my damn diploma, for computer-aided design, CAD tech, doing rendering and blueprints and things like this, which should have led me to a whole different life, and it never did. You know, I carry a lot of baggage, and I know it bleeds through, and I apologize for that. I really do apologize that my personal baggage bleeds through so much on the damn channel. Anyway, he wouldn't even acknowledge me. I don't know if he didn't recognize me, and I found that hard to believe, because I'm, not to toot my own horn, I'm a very distinct looking person for most people. They notice me. It's ironic, because I mean, yeah, you know, I stopped at the Friday night. I had all night. I was out till about 3 in the morning, 2, 3 in the morning working. So I stopped to get some of those loaded tater tot things from Domino's down by the sewer plant. And the old fellow that he's working there, he works there so much, and he knew me by name. I'm like, oh my God, I'm coming into this place way too much if the pizza guy knows me by name. You know, a couple times a month I stop in there. But that's just kind of a, you know, me and the big grease truck and my, you know, bombastic personality at times can be, you know, rememberable, I'm told. Anyhow, so those are my two best friends growing up, and I've had a few good friends since then, but nobody is quite the same as your first best friends, you know. I mean, it is what it is. So we look at Battlespace, and we got quite a hefty rule book that comes with it. And then inside the box itself, we got the Age of Legend, the catalog for the spring of 1993. And we have lots of stuff. And the irony is I can go through this catalog and go down a lot of the product and say, well, hey, look at the Shadow. Let's just take a look at, you know, Shadowrun, for example. I have that box, or that book set. I have the second edition rule box. Imagine that. You know, I never got this thing, but I have this one, and I have this one. I don't know why I didn't get that one. I have the Rigger, I have Paranormal Animals of Europe and Tiered Engineer, Paranormal Animals of North America. I have Shadow Beat. I don't think I got Shadow Tech. Virtual Realities I do have. And I got this one, and I got this one, I got this one, I got this one, I got this one, I got this one. You know, I'm just saying, geez, I got a lot of this crap that's from 1993. Imagine that. And I have yet to get to my Shadowrun shelf. I will, but I have quite a bit of this, and I've also picked up some stuff over the years from you know, the bargain bin. And so we get into here. Of course, I had that box set when it came out. I still have this box set. I have that book. We've done videos on this one. I think I did video on Solaris. I need to do a double check on that. Did this one. We've done that one. This one I did not get. Battle Force I have. City Tech, Aerotech, City Tech, for sure. I don't think I got Aerotech. I don't know why. I don't think I did get Aerotech. Mercenaries Handbook, of course, I have that one. And Comstore and JD. You've seen the videos on all these. I've done videos on all of them. All right? I'm just saying. And then we got the updated and coming stuff and other wonderful things, right? So isn't it nice to, it's just fun sometimes to go through these old catalogs and remind us of what was then or when we were there, and so on and so forth. And so we have the fighter record sheet for Valkyrie Squadron, and all pre-made setup for a pre-made scenario that comes with the book. And of course, as you can see, I never took out, and we rarely played it, like I said, I never took all this stuff out. So a lot of this stuff is still in its original form. Great. I think we had 2 or 3 dropships that we were trying to do a combat scenario thing using these rules. And then, oh, there it goes. That takes me back. So I'm looking at a checklist for an order catalog, right? And I'm looking, and at some point, I went down this list and checked off. You may not be able to see the check marks, but here's the check marks that run down. Probably 85% of the lines are checked from here to here. I never bought Renegade Legion or the other Centurion, I think it was, they put out. Yeah. And I never got into Earth Dawn. I did buy, obviously, a bunch of rock novels. And then we got Shadowrun, of course. And then here's quite a few bit of the Shadowrun products that I have. And some of these I have picked up in the years since then, or after this was filled out, obviously. I was probably, when I got the box set, I just went down. So we got a couple basically space maps that you lay out for your combat, and I do love my hexes. I was never a fan of square settings, and I always thought in space you really don't do well with just a straight square, which was ironic because it took, when I made hex sheets for my would-be game style Interstellar Frontiers, my first efforts, I couldn't just find a pre-made hex sheet and download it. I wasn't in a position to do that, so I had to craft my own. And I was lucky to have access to the computer and the printer that I did, and so I literally made one little hex. And then I started cut, paste, copy, and then I learned how to link all that stuff together and make patterns and forms out of them, so I could then, I made this cluster, and then I cut and paste, and then made big. So that's how I developed my own hex sheet, so I could have them, right? And then some of these are based on some of that, but years later I had access to where I could actually save the things I was working on and work on stuff a little better, and that improved the options that I had available to me. So, and then this here was in the box. This is Battletech Reinforcements 2, additional units for battle technology for 3050. I wrote that up. There was a cover or something for this at one time, and it disappeared. I don't know where it is. And for the most part, it's just, you know, this was one of these things you were meant to either take it and Xerox copies off, or you were to dismantle this and use it once. So like here's the CDM-3M Cicada, the 40-tonner, walking 8, running jump, pair of medium lasers, an AC-5 Ultra, and a small pulse laser. So, you know, just as an example. And I obviously, back in the day, that's what we did. We would go to various locations that were copiers. A number of grocery stores and convenience chains back in the 80s and 90s, when the Xerox copier started coming out, becoming popular, you could go to those places and they would have copier machines that for like a dime a page you could make copies from. And that's what we and my friends were doing. Pre-computer era, right? So, take a look at this here for a minute. Obviously, if you're newer or you've got into Battletech at a later date, there are several new evolutions of space combat rules available to everybody, and you'll forgive me if I can't fire off the top of my head exactly which one of those rule books you want to tap today for the most updated version of this stuff, but this was the original expanded space combat idea. And of course, most of your space combat was going to be used, aerospace fighters, dropships. It wasn't until the invasion of the clans that we reintroduced warships to the scene. And throughout the clan invasion, and even into the Fred Crum Civil War, and perhaps up into the Wabi era, and I'm loath to use the J word since it seems to cheese off YouTube for some reason, so we want to avoid that era that was so well established by the Wobbies, by the warlike. Nobody really had sufficient numbers of warships like they did in the first Succession War. By the end of the second Succession War, they didn't have much in the way of warship fleets either. So my point getting was, warship battles were rare. And extremely rare, and other than in literary circles for the novels, which make for some flashy crap, the reality is the time it takes to repair these things, let alone replace one if it gets destroyed, mitigates just how often even the clans were willing to utilize these things for their full potential as what they were intended to do. Right, so to have them in combat was kind of one of those, and here we go with the effing damn driver thing. When I cancel, stop. Yeah, go the fuck away. I hate that. I just hate it. here we are, 15 minutes into whatever I'm trying to do, and it pops up. And it's not part of the damn thing. I never asked for it, and I don't know why it's on here. And I do not know how to get rid of the damn thing. It just cheeses me off. All right, and then I got something else down here. Let's see, make sure I ain't got nothing hiding down here, because I don't know. Okay, better not mess with that. That's what's recording the damn video. Okay, so now I learned something. All right, so we got contents, playing the game, movement, facing, thrust points, stacking limits, control limits, combat, detection, weapon firing arc, etc. Optional rules, advanced movement rules, campaign operations. Detection was always an interesting conundrum, and this comes up in a lot of sci-fi war games of any sort when we're dealing with large-scale space combat or space operations of any significance. When we use sensors, you know, if you ever played the original FASA version of Star Trek, it was pretty crude, to be honest, but sensors was, and it kind of piggybacked off of Starfleet battles. So what you end up doing is you start the first X amount of rounds rolling dice to see if you can detect each other, and how much, or how fast, or how soon. And this helps to introduce the field, or the vast distance of range between these vessels, because in reality of sensor technology, it's sufficiently superior enough that you should be able to pretty much scan in almost the entire star system that you're in real time and know who's what and where. Obviously, it's going to be vastly superior distance compared to the shipboard weaponry. And yet here we have mechanics that want you to play that line of sight, this hide and seek thing in open space. It just always kind of amuses me a little bit. So when I created the sensor rules for my would-be game Interstellar Frontiers, for example, and there's sensor rules for a reason, because you're going to have naval combat on small and large scales depending on how much you want to invest in your solo game. And so in this aspect, the sensors are pretty straightforward. You know, they patrol or sweep a 10% swath, like a radar, of a damn system. And so everything in that 10% swath is available to the sensor read on that moment. So, you know, it's just a matter of, we know you're in the system, and we haven't, you know, unless you have physical things like you can duck into an asteroid belt or behind a moon, you're going to have a lot of places to freaking hide from the sensor sweeps. It just shouldn't be that way. Movement, facing, thrust points, blah, 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 combat, you know, heat, range, making the attack, damage, optional rules, advanced movement rules, atmospheric operations, asteroid, shellcraft, emergency exit systems, advanced point defense weapons, docked dropships, boarding actions, debris, dropping troops. Yeah, that docked dropships. I know that this come up at the table a couple times over the decades. Can docked dropships fire? You know, can they defend the craft carrying them? And it's been kind of an understanding at the early days that yes, as long as you had a clear field of fire, there's no reason you could not fire your weapons. There's also an unspoken understanding that, generally speaking, in 3025 era, the early era of Battletech, jump ships were sandal sancted. You did not open fire on them. You surely didn't destroy them unless you really wanted to get a lot of problems coming down the gravity well at you. And so it was also kind of an unspoken understanding that these were to be semi-neutral ground, meaning that if the dropships attached to the jump ship choose to open fire, they now make themselves a target, a viable target, and by default, the jump ship carrying them becomes an incidental target, and that the bad guys can then say, we tried to not hit the dropship, or we tried not to hit the jump ship, but the dropship would not give us a choice. You know, kind of one of them legal gray areas kind of stuff. Campaign operations, hyperspace travel, jump point, jump field damage, making the jump cell recharging, and physical effects of hyperspace travel. Detection, deep space rendezvous, docking, launching and recovering small craft, system transit, planetary landing, liftoff, cargo. System transit's always an interesting one. Fuel consumption, in-flight refueling, pilot maneuver. One of the things that gets glossed over in dropship transport, in dropship movement between jump points and their targets. So whether they're running cargo to a planet or they're running a military force to or from the planet, it's still the target. And there are the ideal jump conditions or transition times of under a couple weeks. But there are plenty of examples in the lore, in the novels, in the source books that show systems that have multiple month transitions or longer. Now, I suspect that means there's a lot of solar systems that are within the inner sphere and surrounding the inner sphere, for example, that may have plenty of viable planets in them for both resource, operations and for human habitation, but were skipped over or relegated to the literal back 40 of the back 40 because of the lengthy transit time it takes to go from the jump point, the safe jump points, to the planet you want. So what if you have some mega system where your jump point is literally 8 months or 6 months or a year from the jump point, the transit time for drop shuttles? How do you transit it? How would you make this viable? They basically bump into this every now and then in kind of secondary ways in the lore. Obviously, you're going to have transfer stations. So we know about building space stations at the jump points for refueling and things like this for the jump ships, for the jump drives. But it's quite feasible and realistic to have fuel stations, gas stations, if you will, scattered about your system if your system's well enough developed. This is to facilitate that movement of ships between systems and within the system itself. It's the same reason why the top 2 largest documented dropships are not able to be taken through jump. You can't attach one to I don't think you can. The behemoth they can't land on the planet's surface. I'm sorry, but they're the max limit to how big the jump ships can carry. But that doesn't mean you couldn't, in theory, build even bigger vessels in system for moving bulk goods between a planet and like the jump points and things like this. So, but the infrastructure requirements would be so highly expensive and so deep and in depth that the system have to be extremely viable, have something extremely rare on it that's very worth all the effort and money, not to mention the vulnerability that these systems would have made. So that we go back to the first succession war, by the second succession war, most of these systems would have been dead. They would have been dead because of the lack of supply. I mean, you just didn't get enough supplies in and out of them, or access time. Nobody wants to mess with them. And when you see the devastation of the shipping fleets and other things that come along with the succession wars, I imagine that some of these are actual cut off completely from the inner sphere, and I find that ironic. So when we see the hints and the eventual revelation of the 5 hidden worlds, well, hell, I fully was like, yeah, and that's not a given. I mean, I make the assumption as a game master, as a big fan of the hobby of Battletech in general, that every great house is going to have a number of quote hidden systems or remote systems so unutilized by anybody else or forgotten about for a number of various reasons. Everything from having a great place to store emergency shit, to having a fallback place, to having entire industries. The biggest challenge, of course, is keeping them secret. Obviously, any commerce coming in from them, people moving from them, are going to speak about that. Now, the most obvious way to get around that in my mind is to give them a fake names or fake, so the system that they've been in is not the actual system they've been in, kind of thing. So when they start talking about to people outside, they're looking at something that's completely different and somewhere else, right? Anyway, so we get into things like planetary landings, liftoff, cargo, maintenance for our starships and dropships, repair, crew quality, crew requirements, and then we get into the next subsection of construction rules. And I always like these because this is what, as I've said before, and if you haven't seen my video on JumpShips and the absurdity of the small amount of numbers that FASA and CGL, you know, kind of do a wink and nod at, the idea being is that what we have available to us as players is just a drop in the bucket. Like the Star-Lord is one of the most common. The Mammoth, while not common, is quite common still. But for every one of these, there might be 15 or 20 different versions or different corporate-made jump ships available that were just never made in vast numbers to be quantified that way. So you can use the construction rules to create entirely elaborate, entirely new machines, and be justified in doing so in canon. The canon will support you in this. It's just like specialty items. You talk about refueling and long transit times. Drop ships themselves use a chemical fuel. They use some kind of chemical added to their fusion drives, because they actually do have a fuel issue. At least that's my understanding. And to correct this, there are drop ships that are basically tankers. So you take a freighter and turn it into completely into a tanker for bringing the fuel, food, water, and things like that. That's the other things that they don't talk about. When you talk about being in deep space or being in long transit times, we're talking months of transit, you got to make sure your vessels have sufficient food, water, and oxygen on board to support the crew, to get them to the planet and potentially back, because the planet may not be suitable to provide a large quantity of oxygen, air, and food. That is a cornerstone issue of logistics in my Interstellar Frontiers game. You've got to keep well track of how much fuel your ships have, food, and water, because I have had ships go someplace and run out of oxygen and kill the crew, because there's no oxygen, they can't breathe. It's just is. And then I have to send a replacement ship with a replacement crew and oxygen to retrieve my ship. I'm just saying. Construction rules are awesome. Space stations, calculating costs, converting aerotech craft, aero battle, fighter engagements, modifying battle space, low atmospheric rules. I think the reason I didn't get aerotech was because I bought this set. Aerotech came out before Battlespace did, but I held off buying it in part because I have several, Star Wars Warriors. Warriors, for example, is a space-based aerospace combat system, and I have several others, or did in the past, and since we weren't doing a whole lot of that stuff, my friends and I at the time, I didn't see the value in purchasing the box set for the sake of owning the box set. So I passed on it. And then a year or two, or a couple of years later, this one came out, and this one was much more expanded. So I absolutely had to buy this one because I was just in that stage where I said I got to have it. Let's see, what year was this? 1993. So this came out in 93, a year after I married my current wife. My friend Richie and I had long-hearted ways, and David and I were still kind of having get-togethers. He was a bachelor at that time, and he was working. He had a habit. When I was a bachelor, I had no problem with him showing up on a Friday night or Saturday night at like 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning, and just to hang out. And at that time, I was living at my parents' house, which I hate to say this. I lived at my parents' house well into my almost till I was 32. I moved in and out a few times, but it was never very long. It was hard to support myself out there, and I kept once again convincing myself I would never be able to do it by myself. And I had no role models to encourage me to do otherwise, other than my dad constantly screaming at me, telling me how worthless of a piece of POS I was. That's neither here nor there. So, yeah, it just what do you do? So we played it a few times, and I just bought it for the sake of it. So 93, David was coming over, and he'd come over and throw rocks at our class window. And because I worked second shift those years, and at that time I was working the he was either overnights or second. I can't remember exactly what the ship was at the time, but I know on my days off, my wife and I, Brenda here, we would stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning out of habit, and it just seemed like every other weekend you'd hear that plink, plink, plink against the window and look out there, and there's David down there, grin on his face, and a partial six-pack under one arm, and he'd been out at the bar, so he'd come out to our house for something to do, and that went on for another year or so, and then he met a gal and he moved up the state, and last I heard that him and that relationship fell apart, and he got a job working for a company up there, so I think he's still up there. I wish him well, I really do. I miss the hell out of him, but it is what it is. So this is Battlespace, and if you can get your hands on this, it's worth having. There's a lot of good stuff in here. I mean, this back section was really interesting, and I enjoyed reading it several times. It's the history of naval warfare, right? So we get the introduction, Comstor classified, reports the sanctum, beta level clearance, CCHD, blah, blah, blah. So we talk about, current events, the war on the seas, blah, blah, blah. Starting at what we did from, today to the current level of Battletech in 93s. Planned navies, space stations, fighters, weapon systems, technology, warships, right? Jump ship systems. Like I said, this is a very comprehensive book, and there's a lot of good material in here, and lots of usable mechanics if you're willing to adapt them to your current system. And I think a lot of these are easily adapted to current CGL systems, because a lot of their systems are built on the framework of these things. Anyhow, that's the plan, that's the thought, that's the box set, right? So we have Battlespace, and the box has actually held up real well over the decades. Very nice, all right? Anyway, I'm Rick, you're not. Mama's over here cleaning herself. Till next time.